Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Ben Kelly, along with Lauren Bernard, who's also here. I'm the co-chair of the Brookline Parents Organization, and I just want to welcome you to this very special conversation we're having tonight. It's our first actually with Superintendent Bella Wong, and we're going to be talking about the Brookline Schools budget. So just briefly a little about the BPO. The BPO was founded like over a decade ago now in 2016 as an organization to connect parents and caregivers across all of Brookline schools. And we've been involved in advocacy for many issues over the past decade. Tonight's conversation is one of many we've hosted with the goal of transparency and sharing information for the benefit of the whole community. We're the Brookline Parents Organization, but we understand that people beyond those who have parents in the schools now have interest in our schools. So tonight, the conversation is going to be moderated by our BPO board member, Sadaf Kazmi. Sadaf grew up in Brookline, and she's a proud product of the Brookline schools. She moved back to Brookline in 2019 with her husband and two young daughters, and both of them now attend the Lawrence School, where she is a proud parent. And that's where Sadaf went as well. So Sadaf serves on the Lawrence School Site Council, and she's also been a member for, I think, a year now of the Brookline Expenditures and Revenue Study Committee. Sadaf has a BSc from the University of Pennsylvania School of Engineering, a JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and an MBA from the Wharton School. So Sadaf, thank you so much for, doing the the work of moderating this conversation. So Superintendent Wong is, our new superintendent. But she brings many years of experience to our community. She's been a teacher, a curriculum leader, and a superintendent for a majority of her almost 30-year career in education. Bella is also a Brookline native and a proud alum of BHS and of Runkle, which is our school as well. So prior to joining PSB, Superintendent Wong served as the interim superintendent of Natick Public Schools, where she advanced the district's strategic plan and led through significant challenges, including securing approval for a major elementary school renovation. Before that, she served for 10 years as superintendent and principal of the Lincoln-Sudbury Regional School District, following 5 years as superintendent of Wellesley Public Schools and 6 years as assistant superintendent there. Superintendent Wong has earned her BA in biology from Harvard College and pursued postgraduate study in molecular biology at Stanford. She later earned a JD from the University of California, Davis School of Law and a master's from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She's licensed to practice law in both California and Massachusetts. Her experience across several districts, combined with formal training in science, law, and education, has shaped a leadership style that is methodical and process-oriented. In a year requiring significant financial decisions, that background provides useful context for understanding how she approaches budget development. And so we're so grateful that she's joining us for this important conversation. So Superintendent Wong, thank you so much for being here this evening. I will disappear and let you and Sadaf have your conversation.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Ben and Lauren. Superintendent Wong, thank you again for being here with us today. I want to spend just 1 minute setting up the conversation a little bit. I know a lot of people in this community closely watch the school committee meetings, and some people are following the Expenditures and Revenue Study Committee as well. This is a very engaged parent and stakeholder community, which I think is tremendous, right? It says really great things about the Brookline community. There are also a lot of people who aren't as close to the details and aren't watching those things quite as closely. One of the main goals from my perspective today is to make sure that we share more about what actually doesn't show up in some of those meetings. So a lot of those meetings are very numbers focused. And today we want to help Brookline stakeholders and residents really understand everything that goes on behind the scenes and what happens when you are going through the development process for an incredibly complex budget for the Brookline Public Schools. So the process is incredibly complex, as I mentioned. And this year it's even more challenging because it is an override year. We're also in the middle of contract negotiations with the Brookline Educators Union. And when you joined Superintendent Wong 8 months ago, so it hasn't been very long, there were also a lot of leadership vacancies in the central office. So you had that to contend with as well, really building your leadership team. And then finally, the district went through a really tough budgeting process last year as well. So not an easy situation to drop into. So diving into question one, before we go into the specifics of the fiscal 27 budget and the multi-year forecast, Superintendent Wong, can you take us a little bit behind the scenes and walk us through how did you start developing the budget? What was your process? What were some of the inputs and conversations that actually shaped the budget along the way? And maybe most importantly, how are you thinking about your guiding principles and the sort of core beliefs that you took as you applied that along with your leadership team in making difficult decisions during the process?
So thank you, and also I wanted to thank Ben for the very kind introduction, and also thank all of you for this opportunity to talk about the budget and to introduce myself to all of you in that context. Um, I feel every time I build a budget, there's a story. And so I will say this is quite a story, starting the process in Brookline. As you said, Sadaf, when I arrived, there really wasn't a team in place. And so the first step was actually putting that team together. And I have to say, I feel very fortunate with the senior leadership team that we now have in place. And for everyone who's not so familiar, there's a superintendent and there's three deputies, the deputy of finance and administration, the deputy of student services, and then the deputy for teaching and learning. So I feel very good about the team that's now in place. Before I could do anything about developing a budget, we had to reaffirm and assess where we were organizationally, where we were financially, and also where we were programmatically. Those three big things. And for myself, interviewed I held 200 entry interviews, and from that, gained a lot of perspective about what was what. I also feel that, or I learned that people have different perspectives and had different perceptions of what happened when. So in the first 3 months, I did a lot of triangulating. I talked to a lot of people about what they thought happened over many different things, and really feel pretty comfortable at this point of being able to understand with some certitude about where things might have gone awry, or somewhere, the truth behind all the things that people have said about what has happened when. Um, and so only when we were able to reset the stage, financially, organizationally, and programmatically, were we then able to start looking at developing the budget. Even though I say September, October is when we could really start doing that, I knew coming in July 1 that that was going to be probably the most critical task for us this year. I watched all the school committee meetings from November, the prior November, all the way through. So I had a context, and I also felt very importantly, I wanted to know firsthand what was said at different meetings and how that process might have gone. Through the entry interviews, I was able to determine what happened behind the scenes. Again, listen to everybody. So, one of the things that's really great about the senior leadership team is that we share a common belief and understanding that the core of what we do is what happens in the classroom. We are in agreement about that, and we we that's where it starts, and then from there, what we need to do to support the staff to be able to make that happen. And believing in that too, we also share a core belief that what we're doing is for all students. And so we have a broad view of all the programs and services that we offer. We're hoping to support students that may struggle, students who are flying, all of them. And so our value system about what's important in education, what we want to do in the schools is in sync. Um, I also think our relationship with the principals have also been very strong. So I have said in other forums that the most important thing happening is in the classroom between educator and student or other direct service. The next most important staff member in the district is the building principals. They're the ones that make sure what can happen and what's happening in the classroom is supposed to be or in that direct service. So we work closely with them, and also they have valuable insight about what's important, what they need, the resources, what works, what doesn't work. So in building the budget, the deputies, the three deputies in their three areas, they work with actually about 40 other budget preparers, whether it's the curriculum coordinators, principals, other directors. They're doing that with general education and also across the board in all our student services, not just special education, but counseling and EL, all of that. So I do depend on the team working with all those budget preparers that are working for them or under their supervision and monitoring. In building this budget, we didn't just accept what had been done before. We really looked at every single line and made sure that what was being budgeted was being used efficiently and fully tied to our district goals. So the other thing we did in the summer was come together with the principals and all our curriculum leaders and prioritized what we wanted to do and complete this year. And that has been the premise of the work that we look forward. And also we have the school committee budget guidelines, which assure that we are meeting the needs of all students and other specific items around class size, and also making sure that we are moving forward on literacy and other curriculum areas. So it's been a lot of pre-work and then getting to develop the budget as in through that process.
Great. So I have a couple of follow-up questions for you. So I actually just wanted to comment that I really appreciate the amount of legwork that you did watching all of the prior school committee meetings and all the conversations you had early on in the process. I observed that you had a very strong understanding of what had happened in the district, conversations that had happened, and sort of, the tenor of some of those conversations, which I think was no doubt a tremendous time investment, but really important as you ramped up. You mentioned looking at every line item. I wanted to ask you about zero-based budgeting, and how you think about zero-based budgeting. That was a question that came up, I believe, in your interview when you interviewed with the district. Can you comment on that? And then I had a couple of follow-ups as well to the rest of what you said.
So my understanding of zero-based budgeting is you're starting from scratch. And so I wouldn't say we started from scratch, but we looked at what there was and talked through with the budget preparer, whether it's a curriculum coordinator, director, or building principal, and then walk through about what we pretty much look for the justification of everything that was there. I will say because we're all new, it was easier for us to ask from a place of curiosity, like help me understand what that is. Um, the other thing that was important for all of us and for this team was to acknowledge that it was a really difficult budget process last spring, and it had an impact on staff and it had an impact on their morale. So while we were coming in to with objectivity and wanting to understand and hold ourselves accountable for what we were going to be budgeting and keeping to make sure that we had what we needed and not necessarily more than what we needed. We also had to come in with a place of empathy for the fragility, actually, and vulnerability that staff were still feeling. Um, and so we've had to rebuild that trust as well, with senior leadership, with building principals, but also all our other curriculum leaders and department heads, and through with the BU and with staff. So it wasn't like we could just come and say, we're going to do it this way. We've tried to do it together and openly and with explanation of purpose of why we were doing what we were doing.
Great. In prior conversations, you have mentioned your fiduciary responsibility to Brookline taxpayers. You mentioned just a minute ago about really centering on the classroom and the student, which I think many people find incredibly compelling. Um, how do you define your fiduciary duty to Brookline taxpayers, and how does that coincide or align, or maybe not, with your duty to Brookline students?
I never forget that we all have a fiduciary obligation to our residents, the taxpayers, and because they're the ones that are largely paying for the programs that we offer. And how I feel we fulfill our fiduciary obligation is to make sure we are being as efficient as possible. Um, and we are also building the programs that we say that we are building, and we're offering good quality for the money that's invested. But the third part that's really important is just transparency. I believe people get to ask questions, and we should do our best to answer the questions. And so that's a big part, is making sure people feel good about how the funding is being spended. But we always or spent. So again, we have to make sure we're spending it as efficiently as possible, and then making sure we're making good on those investments and being clear about what we can and what we can't do and what we aspire to do. I as your superintendent and for on behalf of the school district, um, it's our role to tell you what we think the schools need and the pros and cons of decisions that might be made financially or again organizationally or programmatically. And then it's for the community to decide. So, we will always make our best case, I hope, in support of the schools and why we think we're asking for what we think they need. But yes, our we owe we owe the support for the schools to our community, and we owe them transparency and answering questions as they might come.
Mhm. Got it. Thank you. That's incredibly helpful. It's clear that you have a tremendous amount of experience in other districts as a senior leader. I'm curious what some of the things as you're coming into Brookline and kind of going through your first year, not quite, but you're getting close. What are some of the things that you have seen in other districts that you think Brookline could learn from or adopt with respect to the budgeting process? And or what are some of the things that you hope to implement in Brookline during your tenure that you just think would be better, better processes, more robust, or improved ways to do things with respect to the budgeting process?
So with respect to finances, right now I think everyone appreciates what are the big cost drivers. So one of the big cost drivers will be student services. And so it's just looking to see what the district is doing to provide the services that are needed, but also to manage the costs. So Brookline actually is already doing that in the number of specialized programs that they're running in district. So that's actually something coming into any new district. You're just looking to see what strands are being supported. So there's going to be the strands for autism spectrum disorder, behavioral, mental health, um, non nonverbal language disabilities. So you're just making sure you have all the strands met, and Brookline does have that. So Brookline has done a very good job of maintaining strong and pathways for in-district programming. The other cost driver would be negotiating the salaries, all our salaries and benefits. And I think I think it's understood that that the town is struggling partly because of the increase in the health benefits that it's providing its employees. So that's something that needs to be looked at in the near future, long term. So that's definitely something. And then because whatever we're able to do in other areas allows us to invest more in the educational programming. So those are two big drivers that we need to look at. Um, though it's PSB, we're reviewing our systems that are in place. Um, I think I think we could do some improvement in the systems, vertical alignment, horizontal alignment, which brings up the concern around middle school schedule, middle school equity in terms of student experience going through the K-8. So those are long-term things that we can look at. It's not that that's something for every that other school district is something unique to Brookline. That is something that we need to look at. And again, that will take some time organizationally. But there's a lot of things that Brookline has done right and well, as shouldn't be a surprise, I think. But there are other areas that we can look at to see if we can improve some of our financial efficacy, not just for the schools, but townwide.
Got it. Can you elaborate on and sort of clarify for the audience what vertical and horizontal alignment means? I'm not sure everyone will be familiar with that term, or some of the questions around middle school minutes you sort of referenced, and I'm not sure that everybody knows what that is. So maybe you could just explain that for the audience.
So for me, so vertical alignment means that from K through 12, in the different subject areas that we have alignment. So one of the concerns is the 8 to 9 transition. So I actually love that there are 8 K-8 schools. There are some places where you might have a K-8 school, but then you might have other great configurations. So we have 8 K-8 schools, which is a really wonderful opportunity, fewer transitions for students, and also reinforces the vertical alignment K through 8 in a building. What we need to make sure is there better horizontal alignment. So students going from 8 to 9, they're all coming with the same preparation as they go forward. So that's what I mean by horizontal alignment. And the vertical is probably in that 8 to 9 transition that I think we can improve upon. But I think they're part of they stem probably from the same issue. We have small K-8 schools and we have large K-8 schools, and that does impact what is happening in terms of time on learning on particular subjects.
Got it. So by vertical alignment, you mean making sure that every student going from the beginning to the end, so to speak, has the same experience, and then the horizontal is consistency
Right.
across grade,
And
middle school, for example.
and I don't mean to suggest it should be lockstep, but there should be better. There can be improved vertical alignment for
Got
all
it.
students.
Yeah, that's helpful. All right. So shifting gears to a slightly different question, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you have faced during the budgeting process, and how have you and your team navigated those challenges?
So one of the challenges has been because so 3 of us are new to the district. Um, we stepped into an environment where there is a lot of emotionality. And so really coming in with a level of high emotional intelligence to be empathetic to how people were feeling, but also we really needed to find out objectively where everything stood as soon as possible. So that was a challenge. We've all been learning at a very fast rate. It's been very intense, but it's also very people oriented. It's not like we can just go to the data systems and it would tell us everything. It really has been about talking to people and figuring it out. A challenge is that some of the people that had the information just weren't with the district anymore. So again, triangulating, looking at the data, and then being able to assess that. So that was a big challenge. The other challenge is just the public perception around how the district manages itself actually financially, organizationally, and programmatically. And so there's um, just a lot of questions about that. And because so much had happened last spring, um, we ended up being subjected to a lot of audits. So whether it was a DESI audit, MTRS audit, or review of different programs, we seem to have checked the box. And so we've been just rolling from one review to another. So on top of trying to put things in order, we've also had to go through all these other reviews. We've actually gone through successfully the IDA grant audit, MTRS audit, and we have just a curriculum program review coming up in the spring. So we've just been rolling from one to the other. So that's been a challenge. And because of the controversies that we stepped into, we've had to answer many more questions from our local community, however it might be organized, through the audit committee or ENR, or just from the select board or other people. People have a lot of questions. So we've been trying to answer to be responsive as much as possible. So and we're a new team,
Right.
right? So we're a new team getting to know each other, trying to figure out where everything is and how it should be, um, meeting addressing all the audits as they come, and also answering a lot of questions. Um, so,
That's
but I
it.
think we're in a good place. I feel very good about where we are. Um, and again, the community, we owe them transparency, and I feel very good that we are able to offer that at this time.
That's great. I think the community values transparency, and I think it's great to hear that from you that that is something that you feel committed to. What are other things that you're concerned about at this point in the process? Is there anything else you want to share before we move on to the next question?
So I think it's reasonable that the members of the community would question um, the district's past, it's just because of past practice or the perception and the headlines. One concern I have is actually a significant concern is the team has come together and we have done a lot of positive work. And so a concern of mine is that people may not be persuaded that we have managed or overcome legitimately those concerns that the community might have had. Um, and a major improvement is in November when we looked at our budget and we projected forward based on what we had. We were projecting an increase of 12.8 million over the current year budget. At this point, we have worked really hard to refine the lines, and our projection is now at 7.1. It's huge change. And
Right. Yeah.
I just hope people are open to the amount of work that has been done and that they feel they can have confidence in the numbers that we're presenting. So a concern of mine is that people will think that won't be ready to do that. And I feel we've worked really hard and we're trying to answer as many questions as possible and be transparent and hope that um, we've earned the return of that trust.
Mhm. Thank you for that. One of the things that I thought might be helpful as we sort of shift into some more budget specific questions, I know managing the budget is incredibly complex. It's a large budget. And a lot of Brookline residents might not understand how the overall finances work on the town level. I know that for me, I didn't understand this for a long time as well. So I actually put together a quick slide that I thought I would share. I know there's been a reference to town allocation in some of these conversations. uh-oh, I have to, Ben, can you give me permission to share? I didn't realize. Here we go. All right, here we go. Um, so I'm just going to share this slide really quickly and walk everyone through it. So can you see the slide, Bella? Uh,
Yes.
okay, great. So this is just a quick summary, kind of a very distilled summary of how the town school revenue allocation formula works. So what happens is that the town takes in revenues, and that is made up of multiple sources. Property taxes is the largest source by far. It's about 70, something percent of the overall revenue, but there are other sources as well. So parking meter revenue or the excise tax that people pay. In fiscal 27, that's projected at $440 million. And then you subtract the total non-departmental fixed cost here. We often call them shared services. So this includes things like healthcare and benefits and debt service, and that's kind of removed from the top. And that had totaled in fiscal 27 or projected is $194 million. So it's a large portion of the overall revenue. And that gets removed. And one of the things that we've seen in recent years and we're projecting out is that healthcare costs are actually growing double digits. So this line item number two has been larger, than I think people would have hoped. But I think a lot of people have experienced rising healthcare costs in their personal lives as well, so it's probably not terribly surprising. Then what results is the total available dollars for departments. Fiscal 27, again, it's projected to be $246 million. And then that number actually gets split up between the town budget, which gets about 40%, and the school budget, which gets about 60%. And the school budget then is approximately $145 million. I rounded here just for the sake of simplicity. After that, there's some chargebacks or sort of adjustments that are applied after that. But this is really at a macro level how it works. And so what is allocated to the school budget is that 145 million, and this is how the steps happen to get there. I think we sometimes talk about town allocation, and people don't always know what that formula looks like or how that number is arrived at. So I thought that might be helpful to share just for everyone's grounding. One, I think it might be helpful to talk a little bit more as a result of the contours specifically of the school budget. So we heard at the last school committee meeting that non-salary related expenses are 12.5%. So can you share a little bit more about how your team arrived at that number, what goes into it, and how that might align with your experience within other districts? Is that a typical percentage based on your own experience or other metrics you might have seen?
Sure. Thank you, Sadaf. Just one thing about the town allocation that you just described is it's for any town for all the departments, there's always going to be that's just the matter of course, where there's going to be an allocation for each department. And so we can talk more about how that is shifting as we look out in the next 3 years versus what happened in the last 3 years. But as you said, typically, typically, not just in Brookline, but everywhere, usually the school budget is 85% salaries, 15% expenses. Where we are right now at 12.5% is not typical. I am curious where other districts might be, whether this is shifting everywhere. Because again, the most important part of the district is that interaction between educator, direct service to students. So in these fiscal times, we are trying to protect the funding for the educators. So we've been whittling down as much as possible on the expense side. We've actually improved on our tuition lines. We're improving on our transportation. Um, and that is unusual that it's 12.5% of the budget. Usually it's about 15%. It also means as we move forward that the expenses are so trim at this point that it makes it more likely that reductions have to come out of staffing.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that that makes sense, and it's interesting. I didn't realize that the benchmark was that 85% and that we were now
Usually,
over.
usually, but now it's become so trim. Um, and so if I could say a little bit more about town
Oh,
allocation,
yeah.
that's so right now when we are looking at a potential number for a multi-year override, we have made projections over what our increases might be for 27, 28, 29. We have improved, I believe, on our fiscal management so much that the dollar amounts, which are an average 6 million over the next 3 years, including the structural deficit of 1.9 million, is not that dissimilar to the last 3 years. So when you think about budgets and inflation, it's actually quite remarkable that the out years in dollar amount are not that dissimilar from the back 3 years, right? As we look at FY27, we are going to be 40 FTEs net reduced since the last override. So that's part of how. We're also, again, tuition lines are down for next year. We have looked and identified some revenue sources. So there's that. When I looked at the last override, when they created the formula for the last override, there was a town allocation that was much more significant than the town allocation that we're looking at for the next 3 years. The town allocation was almost, for the increase, was almost 4 million for each of those years, and the override was for the gap over the 4 million. What we're looking at for the next 3 years is a town allocation of 1.7 million to almost zero to a negative number for the next 3 years. And I want to be clear, allocation for an increase, right? Not the total allocation, but the allocation for the increase. I hope it's understood that it's reasonable that as we go year to year, there will be an increase, just inflation and salaries, etc. So this is part of my concern is that people are perceiving this big number for the multi-year override looking forward, thinking like, how can it be so much bigger? Actually, the dollars we're asking for are not that different from the last 3 years. What has changed is the capacity of the town to allocate to cover the increases. And so it just underscores um, the where we are financially as a town, right?
Mhm.
So what's changed is the capacity of the town to be able to contribute to cover the increases. So it looks like it's way bigger, but we've actually managed our expenses very tightly, significantly. And so that's I just wanted to be able to highlight that.
Right. And just to sort of jump in and kind of anchor back to the diagram that I showed, I mean, essentially the shared expenses are continuing to grow at a very high rate. I had mentioned healthcare growing double digits. And so what that means is that while the town is able to increase its tax levy, there's limitations based on Proposition 2.5, which I think people are familiar with, that caps your ability to increase your tax levy. And then with a large shared services or sort of non-departmental fixed cost line item and that growing significantly in fiscal 27, for example, that line item basically ate up the vast majority of the increase in taxes that or increase in revenue that the town was able to collect. And so we're continuing to see that over the out years, which means that what's allocated to the town and the schools is largely flat over multiple years, whereas historically there has been some growth that is somewhat in line with the overall revenue growth.
Right.
So hopefully that's clear. That's why I had that picture up
Right.
and wanted people to see how the revenue flows through. And so sometimes it's referenced as the town allocation, but it is really sort of the incremental allocation year over year that has been flat, whereas historically that is grown because the schools are getting about 145 million from the town.
Over the next 3 years, we're not allocating big program ads.
Mhm.
Over the last 3 years, programs have been reduced.
Right.
So the change is the town's capacity to make an allocation to cover the increases. And it's due to the shared services or the high cost of that, which is largely in the health insurance.
One of the things that I think is worth pointing out is that this is something that not just Brookline is experiencing, right? This is sort of a Massachusetts-wide macroeconomic challenge. But let's actually keep going. So in the budgeting process, there's always going to be difficult trade-offs. Last week, you presented Superintendent Wong a failed override scenario to the community, which no doubt was an incredibly challenging set of cuts to compile. When you were faced with making difficult budget choices, either in the original fiscal 27 budget or the failed override scenario, how did you determine where to make those cuts? Were there metrics or benchmarks or other data that you leveraged? How did you go about that challenging exercise?
So we've been trying to do our best to whittle the projected increase down. And so we have been improving it again from 12.8 million to now we're at 7.1 million. Then with the gap of 7.1 million, we tried to distribute the reductions across all levels.
Mhm.
Right. So first we looked again, and these are not the recommended reductions. These are if an override were to fail. We looked at the district level first to see what else we could do. Um, it's important to note that we're trying to keep the director of data and information technology in there. We really need someone to help us with our accountability systems. So we reduced another position at the district level. We were able to refine tuitions. We cut PD some more. So at the district level, we try to do what else we can. Then the remainder that was left, we did a 60-40 split between the K-8s, pre-K-8, and high school. And it was based on student enrollment. So roughly. So it's actually, so anyway, that's how we did it. We 60-40. And so 60% of the remaining piece of it, we looked at the K-8s and 40% at the high school,
Mhm.
right? So I think some early feedback is that, well, there should be more from the high school, but that's how we did it. We did it, it's a financial split. Okay. With the K-8s, we already corrected for enrollment, so all our class actions are meet guidance. All right, so it may be you see a class section of 17, but that's probably because there are 3 sections of 17. If you eliminate a section, then you're over guidance. You're at 24 and 25. So, sorry, nope, I didn't do that right. 25 and 26. So we already corrected for guidance. Any reductions out of the classroom sections now bring us over guidance as a way of, as what I've just described. So unfortunately, at the K-8s, we've lost world language, we've lost the literacy coaches. There are not that many programs left. And so so working with the principals, we prioritize saving the class sizes sections, and we went to the program. So when we go to the programs and we add up to get to that 60% across the K-8s, that's where you see the list.
Mhm. Got it.
Right? If you save any one of those programs, then it means reductions out of the class sections. With the high school, they have 40%. They spread it out over an administrator, some plus ones, increasing class sizes, reduction in coaches. So again, at the high school too, they're protecting the class size as much as possible and looking at the fringes. but it's I think it's important for people to understand that mathematically, that's how we approached it.
And then ultimately the decision about how to apply that was with either the leadership at BHS or the K through 8 principals, or was there sort of a unifying?
In collaboration, so we worked with the principals all together. Obviously, the K-8 worked more on their own to work with their number, and the high school worked with their number. But that's how we divided it. There's also BEEP. BEEP is really that age group. It's really tough to look at reductions there. And BEEP, the classrooms are generated based on the number of students who need special education at that age. So,
Right.
so there's very limited reduction, but I feel like BEEP is those those students are just not independent at all due to their age.
Right. So I'm trying to weave in some of the questions that we got ahead of time from people who are attending the session. And we might not get to everything, but I did try to weave some of those in. So as a follow-up to your point around focusing on prioritizing class size, and therefore the cuts were related to program. The failed override scenario obviously focuses on those programs. What about some of the things that have been floated before around building closures or a model change? Was that considered? Again, this was actually a question that came from the audience.
Sure. We did, I did look at closing a school. There, mathematically, we could redistribute those sections across the district mathematically, but not holistically. So, if we were to close a school, it would cause this domino effect and would disrupt actually as you move the students, because also you're trying to minimize transportation issues or costs. So obviously they're going to be moving to neighboring schools, which then causes those neighboring schools to have students that continue. So it just affects everyone. It's not like you can take a whole group and say, move over here.
Right.
So,
So it's a wholesale redistricting of the town, I think is
yes,
what you're
so
saying.
really, really disruptive. The other is we have specialized programs that are based at different schools. Some specialized programs, there's more than one for a similar strand. They're deliberately cited to be geographically accessible to
Mhm,
as many people as possible. So you wouldn't want to put specialized program of the same strand all on one side of town, because then
mhm.
you end up creating a transportation need
Right.
for that. And also it's just not as accessible for the families. So so there was also like, okay, then you relocate that program, but now it's not in a place that makes sense, and you can incur expense through the transportation.
Mhm.
So we did not forward that as a solution at this time. It also saves less money than you think because the students, you end up moving the teachers with the students. All right, so what you're saving are the singleton expenses, like the principal. But if you think of a school, what are the singleton expenses? It doesn't add up as much as you would think, versus the disruption and
Mhm.
also the relocation of a specialized program to an area that probably didn't make as much sense.
Right.
Um, there
But I
are
would, oh, I'm
other
sorry.
Oh, sorry. There are other modeling that we might think of, but nothing that could be done in time for this cycle. So, and it may actually take a couple of years to think about other ways we can model our
Got it.
school or configure our schools. And that would require, a community input as well.
Right. So the model change question, and I believe you mentioned at the last school committee meeting that this was something that you were going to undertake I think starting over the summer, because I believe one of the school committee members asked this question specifically, and that is a thing that you would want to bring the community along with. So that makes
Yeah.
sense. I
I
think
actually thought maybe there was something we could do in this cycle. But when I started to look at it, it's just more complicated. It takes more time. So it wasn't something I didn't consider even trying to do for this cycle, but it will take more
it's
time.
complex,
Yeah.
inevitably. I think as a follow-up to your question around redistricting and sort of moving teachers, in theory, if you were to do sort of wholesale redistricting, I imagine that you would could reduce the number of classrooms, but that would be a disruptive change in redistricting if in the closing of school scenario, right? So those are the things that go together, has implications from a redistricting standpoint. And then the model change is something that requires a little bit more time to think through. But
Right. And also, if we're thinking about a model change, it made less sense to even think about closing a school. That it's if we're at the precipice of thinking about it, um, just leave things as they are while we look at it.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So shifting gears into another question that we heard from the audience. So one of the critical considerations in the staff reduction for the district was that the district is making for fiscal 27 is reduced enrollment. Some of the members of the PSB community have pointed out that our FTE to student ratios have climbed since the pandemic. You actually mentioned during a recent school committee meeting that comparing these numbers to pre-pandemic ratios wasn't appropriate. Can you explain a little bit more about why the ratios have changed, which roles have increased, and what has impacted these ratios? Um, this is something that I think a lot of people have questions about in the community that I've heard.
Sure. And just to note there, we've called them budget FAQs. They're posted on our website. And so I refer you to that because there's a chart in there where we did an analysis of post-pand some from 23 on to look at our trends. As I thought, um, the increase in FTEs can be attributed to increase in services, in student services. And
Mhm.
so we were actually able to separate out the trends for general education and for student services staff. And so we are negative in the general ed and we are positive in student services. So we
Mhm.
were able to net that out. If you look to the FAQs on the website. I've been asked to go further back. It's a little trickier for this administration to go further back because we weren't here, and the data wasn't necessarily broken out in the way that would be helpful to us to be able to figure it out. So we were only able to go back as far as Susan Givens has been here because she owned the data pretty much all the way through this period. But it shouldn't be a surprise that after the pandemic, we've needed increased services for mental health and academic supports. It's also true that in Brookline, as I said in the beginning, it's Brookline has done a really good job about in-district specialized programs. So I think most of us probably can think about how classes have been added over time, programs that are for that. And so those ratios are definitely higher staff to student, and that's going to skew the trends. So when you go back to pre-pandemic, it's really apples and oranges when you're looking at it. Um, and some might say, well, okay, you're adding all these specialized programs. Isn't that more expensive? One thing Brookline actually compares really well with is the number of students that are out of district and our tuitions actually compare favorably. So that the investment in specialized programs actually is paying off in a
Mhm.
positive way. The other thing I want to point out is when we send a student out of district, it's not just tuition, it's also transportation.
Right.
There's two parts of that. And I also think it's really best for long range outcomes if students can stay in district with their peers in their homeschool setting anyway.
Right. So you're saying that it is better while the staff to support special education or whatever support student needs has increased, that is a better solution than sending kids out of district, and we're doing a better job of that, I think.
Yes, and also we can show the trends that actually in general ed we've reduced, and in the trends for student services is up.
Got it. And
Yeah.
so is it viable to materially change those ratios over time? Do we expect those to go down? When do we expect those to go down? I mean, it is, there's a lot of research out there around the impact on education of COVID and COVID school closures. I'm curious when you expect those to change in terms of the
I
ratios
don't I
on
don't
students.
know that it will revert back. I have definitely received that question, like why is it ever going to revert to
Yeah,
before at this enrollment? I don't see that happening because of the needs that are there. We just added Winthrop House at the middle school level. And
Mhm.
so I don't know that we'll be adding more. I don't see that happening at the rate that maybe district was adding programs before. So it'll kind of level off, but I don't know that it will revert back.
Got it. But what about for students who weren't in school during COVID, for example? Wouldn't we see that once they get through elementary school, or kids who were in school during COVID sort of have exited the system? You wouldn't expect it to revert back then either.
I so so the pandemic doesn't really influence the learning disabilities that are being identified in students.
Mhm.
Um, the need for social emotional supports and mental health, maybe that will change. I'm
Mhm.
not sure. So that would be one that could change, but the other I don't see changing.
Course. Got it. All right, thank you. So another question that we've heard in the PSB community that I want to make sure that we address directly. So many stakeholders in our community have expressed concerns about the district's financial trajectory in recent years. As we consider asking voters to potentially approve a multi-year override, how should the community think about the threshold between necessary investment and fiscal restraint? And what would you want residents to understand in order to feel confident that additional funding is truly justified?
So I believe we looked at building the budget with those concepts in mind, to be as responsible um, financially as possible. And I think the fact that we've gotten from 12.8 to 7.1 as a projected increase is a reflection of that process. I remind everyone that with the proposed budget, we're 40 FTEs down since the last override. Programs have been reduced, like the K-5 World Language, literacy coaches. We are not asking to add big new program. We're looking to sustain, continual curriculum reflection, like looking at science technology, but we're actually doing that within budget largely.
Mhm.
The literacy implementation is largely supported by grant funding. So the the increases that we're looking at, I feel like we've gotten them pretty tight,
Mhm.
right? And we are carrying forward existing program. And again, the number being thought of for a multi-year override reflects the diminished capacity of the town to be
Mhm.
able to allocate funding for those increases. Um, I feel very good about what I see in the schools, in the K-8 schools, at BEEP, and at the high school. I think that what the schools represent is a valuable asset to the town. I wish um, I wish it didn't add up in the aggregate again, not mitigated by an allocation, and it looks so big. Um, but it is it's as tight as we can get it to manage the costs. Um, the kids look good. The kids look good at the high school more than I've seen at other schools.
Mhm.
And when I say that, when I go to other high schools, um, between classes, the students are just gone, but not at BHS. The students are there, they stay there, they're in their nooks and crannies. And I really feel at the high school, they really support a lot of different kinds of kids to feel comfortable, to thrive, and nurturing environment to learn and
Mhm.
and be the best that they can be. What you have is a really good program.
Mhm.
And I know that I think we have to be careful about what we pick apart and the scaffolding that's in place. And I wish I could make it less
Mhm.
costly than it is. But I we're not asking for, yeah, we're not asking for big things. We reduced a lot, and we've gone through every school, every grade level, and adjusted for enrollment in general ed and in student services. So I don't know. I'm sorry. I have to. I say it's good program, and we've tried to tighten up that budget as much as possible to sustain those programs.
Right. All right. So another question that has been sort of floating around in the community is about the amount of administrative staff and whether we have too much administrative staff. And I think sometimes this question arises specifically in the case of Brookline High School. I haven't heard this so much, and it's not coming up quite so much within the K through 8 programs, but there was a specific question around admin staff at BHS. So in that context, the proposal to cut student-facing programs like middle school world languages and music and conservatory in a failed override scenario versus reducing administrative staff further within BHS, or whether there's additional administrative staff to cut within the central office.
Sure, I have heard that too, so I'm happy to be able to address that. So I think everyone knows that a lot of the cuts actually came out of the district office level, and so
Like
we're
the cuts last year, the last
yeah,
year.
yeah, last year. And so we still had identified a couple of positions. We reorganized ourselves to cover functions. There's some functions that we're still missing that we didn't seek to restore. We really need a communications person. We really need another OTL senior director. But we decided to just prioritize the data.
Mhm.
So that. And you did, and it sounds like it got corrected last year. There were definitely elimination of a vice principal. I look at those schools and they do need all the people that they have. A lot of it is discipline or student behavior. I will say the sooner you're able to address it from the time that something happened in a way that makes sense to the student and to the family, the outcomes are much better. So, and the same thing for the high school. Um, we did eliminate one high school administrator in the proposed budget. And I did hear there was that question, and so we took a harder look at it. And this is where the projected budget, I would say, was level service. But now I wouldn't say it's level service, it's a reduced service. So it's
Mhm.
not insignificant to lose an administrator at the high school, but we made that reduction to try to be responsive to what we were hearing. As I've said to in other options, it's just high school. We've got 2,000 plus students there, and it's not like a K-8 where you know where the students are at all the times. In the high school, it's expected that they go where they're supposed to go, and they sometimes have free blocks. They don't always go where they're supposed to go, and they have free blocks. So you actually need this other layer of people that are monitoring and supervising the students. And
Mhm.
when you think of that, how many there are, so the number of associate deans and the number of academic deans, it isn't it isn't that much when
I
you think of, yeah, when you think about how many are that students there are being accounted for. The other thing I said at school committee is all high schools have different layers of scaffolding because some students are really good about seeking help when they need it, and then other students are less likely to do that. So the scaffolding that are in place are to capture or catch
Mhm.
students as they might be. There are some special programs at the high school that are designed to do that more. Students are identified or self-identified for that.
Mhm.
But then there's a whole bunch of other students that that aren't that aren't specially identified for those supports. And so you kind of need all these other generally assigned adults to monitor students. Um, and then many students, they don't say anything, and you need an adult that has come to know them and is astute and is able to intervene in a way that works for that student to make sure that they get the support that they need. Um, so I guess I'm of a different opinion that they're really truly, but we do have one in the proposed budget. Um,
Got it. In the fiscal
yeah,
27 budget, one
yeah.
administrator.
So a lot of it is for, management of student behavior and making sure they are doing what they need to do. And a lot of times it's more significant for the students that are not identified for other special services. And
Mhm.
so that's the majority of our students,
Mhm. Got
right?
it. And I'm curious how this compares to other districts. You've obviously taught at other districts or been a leader at other districts. You mentioned just Brooklyn High compared to other districts, but specifically around the administration, relative to other districts and how that's
So this high school is about double the size of where I was at Lincoln Sudbury
mhm.
and not quite double of Natick. But so that the admin, if I just think of those admin ratios, they're right in there.
They're right in line.
Yeah, they're right in line.
Interesting. All right, thank you. That's
Yeah.
helpful. Is it possible to give a couple of things that you did consider cutting that were not programmatic, that you explored, that you ultimately rejected? I don't know if that's something that you're willing to share, um, because it might be sensitive, but all right, fair enough. I had
Only
to
because
try.
it was hard enough. It's hard enough making the list without adding more to, oh, they were thinking about that too.
Yeah.
People, I, it, these are difficult decisions. Whenever we identify a program, it's impossible for staff to not take that personally.
Hmm.
I feel like, well, you valued this program less than the other program. And
Right.
so in that vein, yes, I don't want to add.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. So I guess I withdraw my question. All right. So moving on to another question. You've been focused on the fiscal 27 budget in a lot of detail and the fiscal 28 to 29 forecast as well, hiring new staff and addressing a lot of challenges that you inherited. What do you see as the longer term budget levers that you might be able to explore for PSB? In other words, given more time, like, what are some of the things that you're looking at? You mentioned taking a look at the school model. There are other things that you'll explore in the coming years, but, with no commitment, but some of the things that you might look at.
Um, I think there are things that I would continue to work with the the town administration about strategies that we can do all together about
Mhm.
managing some of our expenses. And so working in collaboration with them and I don't know, identifying incentives maybe about how we can do that.
Okay. Um, I'm just taking a look at what we haven't asked yet. I mentioned zero-based budgeting. You said that you didn't take a zero-based budgeting approach. It was a little bit different. You obviously were dropped into an incredibly difficult time. So just to sort of circle back to that question, would you, for a subsequent year, look at zero-based budgeting, or is it just not the approach that, might be appropriate in this time? Um,
I think what we did was this year was very thorough. I mean, we looked at everything. We didn't carry anything forward, um, and just put a percentage on it. So every budget was evaluated.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for that. I was just checking to see if we had additional questions that were coming in that we might want to answer. So sorry, I was just
It's
typing a
okay.
little bit. Sorry to multitask here. I think we actually covered a lot of the questions that were coming in through the Q&A. So thank you to people who submitted questions beforehand and submitted some of the questions live. We have one final question, I think, unless Ben, there was anything else from the questions that you wanted to share. So I'll just let Ben answer that. And then otherwise we'll kind of shift into our closing question, which is okay.
Sorry.
Hi, Beth.
Hi. Sorry, Steph, could you
Yeah,
repeat?
I
I
was just
didn't hear
asking if there was
it.
anything else that came up in the Q&A, since it's hard for me to multitask, that you think is worth surfacing. Otherwise, I think we'll kind of get to our wrap-up question for Superintendent Wong, and then I know Lauren was gonna close us out
Um,
at 9:30 anyway. So
there's a couple things. There's something about facilities that I'm not, super clear on. So maybe just say, what are your thoughts about facilities? There was a question in the Q&A. I think that would be the easiest way to put that out there
What do I think about facilities? Ah,
in terms of, funding, properly funding, cost saving, stuff like that, maintenance.
okay. Well, certainly have, I mean, you have the Pierce School project that's underway. Um, I don't, I mean, there are definitely some capital expenses that have been deferred while we're focusing on the operating budget.
Mhm.
One of the things that Chaz and I talked about, or town administrator Chaz Carey, was um, as we look at a override number possibly for the multi-year, if we should make sure where there's some capacity to meet CIP needs, capital improvement projects that have been deferred. Some of our families that are watching, whether, playground structures, things like that.
got
So,
it.
yeah. But in terms of priority, we are just the funding of the programs is just so daunting.
Mhm.
It just sort of overwhelms all those other interests at this time till we can address the operational budget.
So one question that came in that I want to ask, and then we'll go to our wrap up. Is there anything that parents can do to help support you, Bella?
Let me know what they're thinking. I have been making my way through the PTOs, and they are actually, I have been so impressed by the number of people that show up and the questions. Um, so my impression only is of such an engaged parent community, which is really great, and also helps drive the schools, the quality of the schools. So I it's great. Stay engaged, go to the schools, be in the schools, know what's happening. Um, and just, stay informed and let me know what you're thinking. So yes, I have really enjoyed going to the schools and visiting and meeting parents and that parent guardians in that environment.
Great. So our closing question, and then I'll hand it over to Lauren to bring us home. This is obviously an incredibly challenging time. We've talked about that, a difficult financial situation in Brookline, as well as most Massachusetts communities. Amidst all of that, what is it that keeps you engaged? What inspired you to decide to come out of retirement and take this role? It's a tough role. I think everybody acknowledges that. Ultimately, what gets you out of bed in the morning, inspires you to come to work every day here in Brookline.
So I really believe in education, that it's an investment in our future. And I have said in other environments, there's no reason not to believe that we're educating the future leaders of the world. And so what a wonderful opportunity to be here in Brookline, to be a part of that. But I believe in and support all educators, whether it's private or public. But I am a public school advocate. I believe every student should have a strong public school choice.
Mhm.
And I think Brookline is the epitome of that. And so I am excited to be part of that process. I I also am concerned about the challenges the district faces and a sense of people being disheartened by those challenges. And so I guess part of my motivation is to rally everyone to there is Brookline's a very special place. Brookline's such a special place because of where it's located, its proximity to all these other academic, cultural institutions, and the people that are drawn to be in this community and bring their children here to be educated. It's not something you can recreate. This sort of all the gestalt of everything. So I would love in my tenure to whatever I can do to restore that faith in believing that 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 you can do this and it's all good and students are being well educated and that we're meeting the needs of all students and that there's a place for everyone. Anyway, it sounds so idealistic, but anyway, that's what I believe and I'm excited to be here. And I do believe Brookline's a very special place.
That's great. I think we need some of that idealism in this challenging time. So thank you. And I agree with you. Brookline is a very special place. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the investment in being here. Thank you for coming out of retirement to serve this community and be part of this community again, which I think is wonderful. I'm going to hand it over to Lauren to close us out. So over to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Sadaf.
Thank you, Superintendent Wong, and thank you, Bella. I mean, Sadaf. Bella is Superintendent Wong. I just want to say that, this has been such an interesting conversation. I think we had, 135 attendees, and that's a good number of people. So I appreciate your being able to speak from the heart, as you just did, while answering tough questions and talking about really tough issues. And you call it idealism, and I think it's more sort of love of place is inspiring, and I think is important for people to hear to kind of get through a rough time. We need that, and we appreciate your words of optimism. So thank you. And to our attendees and audience, thank you for attending. We hope you got as much out of this as we did. I certainly got a great deal out of it, and I was very excited about this event. And we will be posting this conversation on our website very soon. And if, as usual, if you have any questions or anything, please do write us at info@brooklineparents.org. And we will see you at our next event. Not sure when that will be, but probably not for too long. Good night, everyone. Thank you again, Dr. Wong.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Sadaf.
Okay, thank you.